Family sabotage. How my wedding turned into a battlefield of emotions. I never thought my own family would try to sabotage the happiest day of my life. My fiancée Emily and I had been together for 4 years, and we were just weeks away from our dream wedding. We'd met in college as she was studying art history, I was in engineering, and we bonded over late-night study sessions in the library, sneaking coffee past the librarians, and laughing over our terrible handwriting. Emily was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. Kind, creative, fiercely independent, with a laugh that could light up the darkest days. We'd been through a lot together moving to a new city, starting our careers, even surviving a year of long distance when I took a job out of state. But we made it work. And last year, I proposed to her on a quiet beach at sunset. The waves crashing around us as she said yes, tears in her eyes. We'd spent months planning the wedding, a small outdoor ceremony in a garden near the city, with fairy lights, wildflowers, and a playlist of all our favorite songs. We wanted it to be simple, intimate, a day that was just about us and the people who truly supported our love. But my family had other plans. I come from a tight-knit but controlling family. My parents, David and Linda, always had high expectations for me. Growing up, they pushed me to be the perfect son, straight A's, captain of the soccer team, a future lawyer or doctor, someone they could brag about at their fancy dinner parties. My younger sister, Chloe, was their golden child, always following their rules, while I was the one who pushed back. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an engineer, to build things, to create. When I told them my plans, they called me a disappointment, said I was throwing my life away. Things got worse when I introduced them to Emily. She's an artist, a free spirit, someone who values creativity over status, and my parents hated that. They called her flighty, said she wasn't good enough for me, that I deserved someone more ambitious, someone who fit their idea of a perfect daughter-in-law. They wanted me to marry someone like Chloe's best friend, a corporate lawyer named Rachel, who they'd been trying to set me up with for years. I told them I loved Emily, that she was my future, but they refused to accept it. They barely spoke to us after we got engaged, and I thought they'd just stay out of our lives. I was wrong. A month before the wedding, my mom called me out of the blue. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since she'd sent a passive-aggressive text about how I was making a mistake with Emily. Her voice was overly sweet, the kind of tone she used when she wanted something. "We want to be part of your wedding," she said, her words dripping with false sincerity. "We've been too hard on Emily. Let us help with the planning, we'll even pay for the catering." I was skeptical, but Emily, always the optimist, encouraged me to give them a chance. "Maybe they've come around," she said, her eyes hopeful. "It'd be nice to have your family there to start fresh." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I told my parents they could help with the catering, but that was it. We'd already planned everything else. They seemed happy, even excited, and for a moment, I thought maybe Emily was right. Maybe they had changed. But then things started going wrong. The first sign of trouble came a week later. Our caterer, a small family-owned business we'd chosen for their amazing Italian menu, called us in a panic. "We're so sorry, but we have to cancel your order," the owner said, his voice shaking. "Someone called and said the wedding was off, that you didn't need us anymore." I was stunned. Emily and I hadn't canceled anything. We'd been looking forward to their food for months. I asked who'd called, and the owner hesitated before saying, "It was a woman. She said she was the groom's mother." My stomach dropped. I called my mom immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. "Did you cancel our catering?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She paused for a long moment before answering, her tone cold. "I did you a favor. That caterer was a terrible choice, cheap, unprofessional. I've already booked a better one, someone more fitting for our family." I was furious. "This isn't your wedding," I shouted. "You had no right to do that." She brushed me off, saying I'd thank her later, and hung up. Emily was devastated when I told her she'd spent hours picking that caterer, wanting everything to be perfect. But that was just the beginning of my family's interference. After the catering incident, I should have cut my family off completely, but I didn't. I wanted to believe they'd stop, that they'd respect our boundaries, but I underestimated how far they'd go to control my life. The new caterer my mom had booked was a fancy, overpriced company that specialized in gourmet food we didn't even like: caviar, foie gras, things that felt more like a status symbol than a celebration. Emily and I are more pizza and pasta people, and we'd chosen our original caterer because their food felt like us, warm and comforting. But my mom didn't care about what we wanted. "You'll thank me when your guests see how classy this is," she said when I confronted her again, her voice smug. I told her to cancel it, that we'd find someone else. But she refused, saying she'd already paid a non-refundable deposit. I was livid, but we didn't have the budget to lose that money, so we were stuck with her choice. Emily tried to stay positive, saying, "At least we'll have food," but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. I felt like I'd failed her, like I couldn't protect our wedding from my family's meddling. Things got worse from there. A few days later, our florist called to say our order had been changed. We'd picked wildflowers, daisies, sunflowers, lavender to match the garden theme of our wedding, a mix that reminded Emily of her childhood summers. But someone had called and changed the order to white roses, the kind of formal, generic flowers my mom always loved. I didn't even need to ask who it was. When I called her, she didn't even try to deny it. "Wildflowers are tacky," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Roses are elegant, timeless. You want your wedding to look good in photos, don't you?" I was shaking with anger, my voice rising as I shouted, "This isn't about you! It's our day, not yours!" She sighed, like I was being dramatic, and said, "You'll see I'm right." I hung up, my hands trembling, and looked at Emily, who was sitting on the couch, her face pale. "I just want our wedding to be ours," she whispered, her voice breaking. I pulled her into my arms, promising I'd fix it, but I didn't know how. We managed to get the florist to switch back to wildflowers, but it cost us an extra fee we couldn't really afford. My family was turning our dream wedding into a nightmare, and they weren't done yet. The final straw came 2 weeks before the wedding. We'd invited 50 people, a small group of our closest friends and family, including Emily's parents, who were nothing but supportive. My parents and Chloe were on the guest list, despite everything, because I still hoped they'd come around. But then I got a call from my best friend Jake, who was supposed to be my best man. "Dude, I just got a message saying the wedding's been moved to a different venue," he said, his voice confused. "Some fancy hotel downtown, is that true?" I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. We hadn't changed the venue or garden was perfect. A place we'd chosen because it was where we'd had our first date. A spot that meant everything to us. I called the garden's event coordinator, and she confirmed my worst fears. "Sister called and said you'd found a better venue," she said, her voice apologetic. She canceled the booking. "I'm so sorry, we've already booked another event for that day." I was beyond furious. I called Chloe, my voice shaking with rage. "Why would you cancel our venue?" I demanded. She didn't even sound sorry. "Mom and Dad thought the garden was too cheap," she said, her tone cold. "They booked a hotel instead, somewhere more appropriate for our family's status. You should be grateful they're paying for it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't your wedding," I shouted. "You had no right to do this." Chloe just laughed, saying, "You'll thank us when you see how much better it is," and hung up. I sat down, my head in my hands, feeling like I was losing control of everything. Emily was next to me, her eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she said, "I don't want to get married in some hotel." That garden was our place, our memory. I pulled her close, my heart breaking as I felt her shake in my arms. My family had gone too far. They'd taken our wedding, our special day, and turned it into something that wasn't us at all. I knew I had to do something, to take back control, but I didn't know how. They'd already done so much damage, and I was starting to wonder if they'd ever stop trying to control my life. I couldn't let them ruin this for us. Not after everything Emily and I had been through. I had to fight back. For her, for us, for the future we deserved. After my family canceled our venue, I hit my breaking point. I'd spent my whole life trying to please them, to be the son they wanted, but I was done. This was our wedding, our day, and I wasn't going to let them take it away from us. I sat down with Emily that night, her hands in mine, and we made a plan. "We're not getting married in that hotel," I said, my voice firm. "We're taking our wedding back." She looked at me, her eyes still red from crying, but a small smile broke through. "How?" she asked, her voice soft but hopeful. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew we had to start by undoing the damage my family had done. First, I called the hotel they'd book at a fancy, overpriced place with chandeliers and marble floors. The kind of venue my parents loved but we hated. I told the manager we were canceling, and when he said the deposit was non-refundable, I didn't care. "Keep the money," I said, my voice steady. "We're not getting married there. My parents could deal with the loss they'd caused this mess, not us." Next, We had to find a new venue, and fast. It was 2 weeks before the wedding, and most places were booked solid. We called every garden, park, and outdoor space in the city, but nothing was available. I could see the panic in Emily's eyes, the fear that we'd have to settle for something we didn't love. But then I had an idea. Emily's parents owned a small piece of land just outside the city, a quiet meadow surrounded by trees, a place where Emily used to play as a kid. We'd visited it a few times, and I knew it was special to her. "What if we have the wedding there?" I asked, my heart racing with hope. Emily's face lit up, her eyes sparkling for the first time in days. "That would be perfect," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. We called her parents, who were thrilled to help. "We'll set up everything," her dad said, his voice warm. "You two just focus on each other." For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were back in control, like this wedding might actually be ours again. But I knew my family wouldn't let it go that easily. I called my mom the next day, my voice cold as I told her what we'd done. "We canceled the hotel," I said, cutting her off before she could argue. "We're having the wedding somewhere else, and you're not invited. None of you are. You've done enough." There was a long silence on the other end, and then she exploded. "How dare you!" she shouted, her voice shrill. "After everything we've done for you, you're cutting us out? We're your family!" I didn't back down. "You stopped being my family when you tried to ruin our wedding," I said, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me. "You don't care about what I want, what Emily wants. You only care about your image, your control. I'm done with it." She started crying, but I knew her tears were fake. She'd always use them to manipulate me, to make me feel guilty. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You're making a huge mistake." I hung up, my hands shaking, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to them, really stood up to them, and it felt good. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning. Emily's parents helped us set up the meadow, stringing fairy lights through the trees, setting up a small wooden arch covered in wildflowers, creating a space that felt like us, not my parents' version of us. We found a new Catarera local pizza place we loved, with a wood-fired oven they'd bring to the venue, a perfect fit for our laid-back vibe. Emily's best friend, a photographer, offered to take our pictures for free, and my buddy Jake, my best man, helped us put together a playlist of all our favorite songs. It was coming together, piece by piece, and I could see the light returning to Emily's eyes, the excitement we'd felt before my family's interference. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my family wasn't done. My mom's words, "You'll regret this," kept echoing in my head, a warning I couldn't ignore. I knew they'd try something else, something to get back at me for cutting them out, and I had to be ready. I just didn't know how far they'd go. The day of the wedding arrived, and I woke up with a mix of excitement and dread. The meadow looked magical, the morning sun filtering through the trees, the wildflowers glowing under the fairy lights we'd hung the night before. Emily was getting ready at her parents' house nearby, and I couldn't wait to see her, to finally say the vows we'd written together, to start our life as husband and wife. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my family was planning something. I'd told Jake and a few other friends to keep an eye out, to let me know if they saw my parents or Chloe anywhere near the venue. "They're not invited," I'd said, my voice firm. "If they show up, I want them gone." Jake nodded, clapping me on the shoulder. "We've got your back, man," he said, his voice reassuring. I tried to focus on the day, on the love I felt for Emily, but the dread lingered, a shadow I couldn't escape. The ceremony was set to start at 4 p.m., and by 3:30, our guests were arriving, their laughter filling the meadow as they found their seats. I stood under the wooden arch, my heart racing, my hands sweaty as I adjusted my tie. Jake was beside me, cracking jokes to keep me calm, but I could barely hear him over the pounding in my chest. Then I saw her Emily, walking down the aisle, her white dress flowing around her, a crown of daisies in her hair, her smile brighter than the sun. She looked like a dream, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Her dad walked her down the aisle, his eyes misty with pride, and when he handed her to me, he whispered, "Take care of her." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion, and took her hands in mine. The officiant started the ceremony, and we said our vows, promising to love each other through every challenge, to build a life together, to be each other's home. I slipped the ring on her finger, my hands trembling, and she did the same, her smile never fading. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," I pulled her close, kissing her as our friends cheered, the sound echoing through the meadow. It was perfect, everything we'd dreamed of. But then I saw them. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted my parents and Chloe standing at the edge of the meadow, their faces cold, their arms crossed. My heart sank. I'd hoped they'd stay away, that they'd respect my wishes, but I should have known better. Jake noticed them too, and he started walking toward them, but I stopped him. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice low. I walked over, Emily's hand in mine, her grip tight as she followed me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger rising inside me. My mom stepped forward, her eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with venom. "We're here to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life," she said. "You can't marry her, she's not right for you. We've brought Rachel, she's waiting at the hotel, ready to step in." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They'd actually brought the woman they wanted me to marry, thinking I'd call off my wedding at the last minute. Emily's grip on my hand tightened, her voice shaking as she said, "This is our day. You have no right to be here." I looked at my family, the people who were supposed to love me, support me, and felt nothing but disgust. "You're not my family anymore," I said, my voice cold. "You've tried to control me my whole life, but I'm done. I love Emily, and I'm marrying her, whether you like it or not. Leave, or I'll call the police." My dad scoffed, his face red with anger. "You're throwing away your future," he said, his voice booming. Chloe smirked, adding, "You'll come crawling back when this falls apart." But I didn't flinch. I turned to Jake and a few other friends who'd gathered behind us and said, "Get them out of here." They stepped forward, and my parents and Chloe finally left, muttering threats as they walked away. I took a deep breath, turning back to Emily, her eyes filled with tears but also with strength. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, pulling her close. She shook her head, her voice soft. "You stood up for us," she said. "That's all that matters." The rest of the night was everything we'd hoped for. We danced under the stars, the pizza was a hit, and our friends filled the meadow with laughter and love. Emily and I shared our first dance to "Can't Help Falling in Love," her head on my shoulder, my arms around her, the world fading away until it was just us. We cut the Kakia simple vanilla one with wildflower decorations and fed each other, laughing as frosting got on her nose. As the night ended, we stood together, watching our friends set off sparklers, the light reflecting in Emily's eyes. I knew we'd made the right choice, cutting my family out, choosing each other over their control. We're building a new life now, one where we make the rules, where love comes first. My family thought they could break us, but they were wrong. Emily and I are stronger than ever, and our wedding day was just the beginning of our forever.